This is Federalist 37, Part 2. If you haven't seen Federalist 37, Part 1, please make sure you see that before you read along with me here in Part 2 and the next few parts. I mentioned Madison's memo that he wrote in 1786, Confederations, Modern and Ancient. That was after studying the modern and ancient confederacies and finding out what their weaknesses were and if they had any strength, what it was. That helped him prepare for the work he did in the convention and in the run-up to the convention and in his work afterwards in the first Congress of the United States. And the other important thing that he wrote in 1787, Vices of the Political System of the U.S., where he looked at the previous 11 years, especially from 1776 to 1787, to see what big problems there were with the political system in the 13 states. Then, of course, they talk about this philosopher, Montesquieu, and his work, Spirit of the Laws. Of course, all of them were familiar and influenced deeply by John Locke. The philosopher David Hume, also with the Scottish Common Sense School of Philosophy, and also with the work of Thomas Hobbes and the history of England. So they had familiarity with all of these. These are some of the names I mentioned in Part 1 of Federalist number 37. And this is my way of saying thanks to the OU community. I went to school to the University of Oklahoma, OU, and over the years I've benefited from the lectures and the community here, and especially from the library. So this is my way of saying thank you to them. Anyways, this is by James Madison, as we talked about it in Part 1. James Madison starts writing quite a few articles back to back, starting with 37 in January 11, 1788, and talks about the convention, why the Constitution was written the way it is, how human beings are fallible, and you have to keep that in mind, that we gave you what's best, what a group of human beings could do at their best, and the best thing they could give you. So I'm going to start reading the paper. In reviewing the defects of the existing Confederation and showing that they cannot be supplied by a government of less energy than that before the public, several of the most important principles of the latter fell, of course, under consideration. But as the ultimate object of these papers is to determine clearly and fully the merits of this Constitution and the expediency of adopting it, our plan cannot be completed without taking a more critical and thorough survey of the work of the Convention, without examining it on all its sides, comparing it in all its parts, and calculating its probable effects. That this remaining task may be executed under impression conducive to a just and fair result, some reflections must in this place be indulged, which candor previously suggests. So we talked about up to now the shortcomings of our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and why it was that we came together to write this new Constitution. And plainly and honestly tell you why it was written the way it was, why the Constitution took the shape it did. It is a misfortune inseparable from human affairs that public measures are rarely investigated with that spirit of moderation which is essential to a just estimate of their real tendency to advance or obstruct the public good, and that this spirit is more apt to be diminished than promoted by those occasions which require an unusual exercise of it. To those who have been led by experience to attend to this consideration, it could not appear surprising that the act of the convention, which recommends so many important changes and innovations, which may be viewed in so many lights and relations, and which touches the springs of so many passions and interests, should find or excite dispositions unfriendly both to on one side and on the other to a fair discussion and accurate judgment of its merits. In some, it has been too evident from their own publications that they have scanned the proposed Constitution not only with a predisposition to censure, but with a predetermination to condemn, as the language held by others betrays an opposite predetermination or bias, which must render their opinions also of little moment in the question. In placing, however, these different characters on a level with respect to the weight of their opinions, I wish not to insinuate that there may not be a material difference in the purity of their intentions. It is but just to remark in favor of the latter description that as our situation is universally admitted to be peculiarly critical and to require indispensably that something should be done for our relief, the predetermined patron of what has been actually done may have taken his bias from the weight of these considerations as well as from considerations of a sinister nature. The predetermined adversary, on the other hand, can have been governed by no venial motive whatever. The intentions of the first may be upright, as they may on the contrary be culpable. The views of the last cannot be upright and must be culpable. But the truth is that these papers are not addressed to persons falling under either of these characters. They solicit the attention of those only who add a sincere zeal for the happiness of their country, a temper favorable to a just estimate of the means of promoting it. So, like I said in part one, he says, anybody that's been in politics, anybody who's had a hand in it, will realize how tough a job it is to gather in a convention and come up with a plan. And he says, we already see from the start that two groups of people have been writing articles against this Constitution. Some of them don't mean a bad thing. They don't have evil intentions. They probably have not got the meaning of the Constitution yet. They have just superficially read it. And we understand that. That's why we were going to talk more about what the Constitution and what the convention did, how they looked at the whole thing. And he says there are some people who have sinister views from the beginning. They just are against us because they will lose money or position if this new Constitution is adopted. So from the get-go, they're going to be against us, and it seems like we can't do anything about it. And at the end, he says, we've written these papers, these articles, for all of you American people who have your mind and hearts open and you want to see your country prosper, be free and not be dominated by these European powers.